And
hello, everybody.
right.
That's awesome.
Thank you all for coming today. There was a little anxiety that we'd have a lot of bodies in the audience, and we have lots of great bodies in the audience, some great minds as well. Really happy to see you here. I'm David Traub, and this panel is really on the convergence of VR and AR. AR now, but VR. It's VR now, but AR increasingly so. It's been of interest to me for about 30 years. The first time I put on a head-mounted display was in 1987 at Autodesk. And in 89, 90, in graduate school, I'm an educator. I wrote and designed the world's first virtual reality simulation game for family therapy, modeling family systems and family ecologies in an environment where you could create rich character representations of your parents, yourself, your siblings, and watch how you interacted and became how and who you are as a function of external circumstances. Because of that, and articles I wrote in the late 80s on the future of VR in education, which has always been my interest, mental health education, economic development education, I got invited to a movie called The Lawnmower Man as the main virtual reality consultant. I also produced display graphics in the movie, and that was a great experience for me. I was one of the biggest beneficiaries. That led to me producing 3D games and working for most of the record labels throughout the 90s, producing games, working with Peter Gabriel, U2, B.B. King, Queensryche, lots of interesting people. In later 90s, raised a bunch of money and did 3D career games. And then in 2012, well, actually the later 90s, I started doing wearable computing, which is always very interesting to me. The idea of computing that could have a URL attached. This was presaging IoT, or Internet of Things, which is one of the very big hotspots besides virtual reality in the venture world right now. 2012, I got very lucky, and I was invited to be the executive producer of the Steve Jobs movie, the other Steve Jobs movie, with the comedian, with Ashton Kutcher, excuse me. It worked. Okay, I got a laugh. Actually, he's much taller than me and far wealthier. So he wouldn't appreciate that, but he did a great job. And currently, I'm involved in various activities focusing on the convergence of VR, AR, and IoT. Again, IoT is very big. Why do I care about IoT? Because I have 3 different investors representing over $1 billion from China, India, the United States that have all come to me and said, hey, if you know any good IoT companies, how many people here know what IoT is? That's not even a third of the audience. Internet of Things. This is, I hate to say it, but possibly even bigger than VR in the investing world right now, because everything is going to have a URL and it's going to talk. And when you start having wearable environments or contained environments, which is VR, other types of displays, clothing, augmentative clothing, et cetera, that can talk to each other, you can begin to see where it's all going, which is the purpose of this panel. So here we are, stage 2. Stage 1, when I tried VR for the first time, it was with a head-mounted display developed by a company called VPL, which David Levitt actually happened to be part of. We've known each other since that long. That was stage 1, which is the $10,000 head-mounted display. And VR was pretty active at that time in the military, which is really where it came from, in academics, et cetera, but it really wasn't meant for consumers. We're in stage 2 right now. I remember having my breath almost taken away when I sat in the offices of Dodo Case up in San Francisco, and I realized that they were selling virtual reality headsets for $25. And then I realized that and learned they had gotten a license from Google. It was Google Paper, Google Cardboard. And then I heard only about 6 weeks later that there's a company giving them away for free. You had to pay for mailing, but it sounds even if it's the same cost, it sounds better. And this is definitely stage 2, and obviously, or most of you probably know that it's supposed to come out with a big bang this Christmas. Haven't seen a lot of retail selling, advertising yet, but this is supposedly the Christmas where it's going to happen. Maybe it's next year. And the numbers are pretty all over the place. I read one number by 2018, the combined virtual reality and augmented reality marketplace is going to be $1 billion. Is that surprising? It should be, because on that same first page on Google, the combined future of VR and AR is $150 billion. And they were right next to each other. And then there's 18 million or 18 billion. I guess some people are trying to keep credibility. But AR is a very interesting marketplace. It hasn't had the sexy app yet. Google Glasses tried to be the first sexy app, but it hasn't really happened. It hasn't really taken off for a variety of reasons. But it's in the right direction. It's definitely innovation. But where are we and where are these things going now? This was initially a future of VR music panel, because I have a music background. I particularly am interested in the future of streaming VR, where you can sit at home, put on your head-mounted display, put 1995 into the till, and be on stage with Bono or Beck or whoever you want. And to me, that seems like a business model that really could and should work. So that was where I was going, but Victor didn't want me to do a music spun panel. He wanted to be more broad, and so for me, that was VR and AR, with really VR leading, but AR coming. I think that's probably right for now, but I also heard recently that AR will be 100 times bigger than VR, ultimately, because it's not self-contained, it's wearable, it recedes and protrudes as you need it. Ultimately, all these interfaces are only good if they're invisible, and they augment your humanness. So AR is a little bit different, and stage 2 is a little bit different now, as I said, because this thing called AR, which really almost nobody talked about 2 or 3 years ago, and of course everybody in this room is different because we're all semi-industry or industry, but AR is emergent now. It's even in the public eyes. B, again, this thing called IoT, which a third of you or 2/3 of you haven't heard of yet. You're going to be hearing about it. It's pretty techy, but it's very important. So that's a new thing, because with IoT, AR in the form of wearable interfaces and wearable clothing is going to embrace what VR does, minus the differentiation that VR is completely self-contained. So it's, obviously it's a no-brainer for gaming. It's a no-brainer for immersive experiences. It's a little more challenging for social, although there are a few companies now, which you'll be hearing about shortly, that are doing or attempting to do social VR with digital video and other formats. But AR has an open interface, but VR, $1 billion, I was told a couple of days ago, has already been invested. There's one company up in the Bay that's done 17 investments just in VR. I know Kleiner Perkins just took a meeting the other day. A lot of, all the VR, all the people are doing it, but it's like 99, 2000, and I'm a Silicon Valley guy. What does that mean? Does that mean I live up there? Well, that's besides the fact. I had 2 IPOs that failed. That makes me a Silicon Valley guy. I went from multi-millionaire to multi-hundredaire in about 60 days, and I don't like roller coasters, and there's a reason for it. But I am spiritual, so it was all perfect anyways. The connection between the two, Sausalito to be specific, where even the police do massage, a little roughly if you're a bad guy, but the connection between the two is becoming emergent. How many people here have heard my feedback joke?
Yeah.
Can I give you guys some feedback? Are you okay as an audience? Because this is going to be a different panel. Are you guys okay with feedback? Okay. That was it. It was positive. My panels are a little different because the sooner we stop talking, because you don't really learn from master educators speaking, because you don't get to cross-reference it against the short-term problems you have in your mind. Right now, what happens is we get about 2 gigabytes of data every second, or 400 million bits every second. I know this because I had to rewrite somebody's speech the other day. Only 400 of those bits are actually processed by the brain. And what happens is all this gigabits comes in, and we grab those few things that are relevant to the problem. This is important. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But the point is we learn not only by receiving data, by agreeing on data, debating data, and talking. So very soon, we'll all be talking, and if you don't ask questions, I'll be asking you. How many people have heard me speak before on my panel? Okay, good, thank you. Thank you for coming back. Somebody must have paid you. So the stage 2 is a little different also for the fact that people are getting used to cybernetics. Do you know what cybernetics are? Cybernetics are molars, they're glasses, they're hearing aids, they're implants. Cyborgs are people that have increasingly amounts of cybernetic technology to augment their humanness. This is where we're going, only the bandwidth is opening up. So where are we going, and what about the convergence? I have two thoughts. One of them, again, is the brain. I just told you that the brain, we need to look at the brain to understand where things are going and where VR and AR and all these other things are going to go. Memory and behavior is concretized quickly. You know, when you learn things, you receive it, and if it's relevant, and then you start to practice the behavior, literally those synapses concretize. It's actually really hard. It's like, it's like almost like ice. And you literally, to change a behavior, you literally have to break those synaptic connections to do something. That's why disruption is so hard to do, and it's so invaluable, because if you can change the behavior of an individual or a family or a culture or a market, you deserve every penny, ideally for good things. But you remember the way the brain works is solving problems. This is what we do. So when you think about virtual reality and AR, where it's going, all you need to think about is what the body needs, what the brain works, and how it already works. How does it get excited? How does it work? How does it solve problems? So number one, think about where the brain's going, and that's going to be a bit of a thesis on this panel. Literally, we have brain scientists on the panel and PhDs. The other rule is that in comedy, there's a rule of three. It's always the third one that's the punchline. I don't know if this presages poorly for VR. We're sort of in the second stage. Maybe the third stage will happen after the second quarter next year, when someone said that 75 to 80% of all the VR companies are going to disappear. I don't know. There seem to be a lot of them out there, most of them trying to do the same thing, which is trailblaze in VR narrative and VR storytelling. And I'm just not totally sure if that's where people really want to go. In the late 80s, CBS did a research because it was the first time that interactive television would enable multiple endings. Turns out people didn't want multiple endings. They wanted to be caught in a suspension of disbelief where they could be entertained by a powerful storyteller. Now, Brett Leonard, who's not on this panel, he's on my last panel, who's the director and creative Lawnmower Man, has a theory. I'm not going to use its term because it's that's his thing, but the notion is there are different weights given to narrative structures. The director will have the heaviest weight and take you where he wants to go, but the further away you get from the director, the more you go towards the machine and physics like you do in gaming. At any rate, on that note, I want to bring together some friends of mine, and I want to introduce you, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves because usually I exaggerate, except when it comes to introducing myself, of course. And I'm going to want them to introduce themselves, and then what I'm going to do is ask each of them to articulate a trend, or 3 or even 5, however many they feel like in a few minutes. They've personally observed from their perspective and their background that is something that's new as to where things are going, because I think that's invaluable to whatever extent they're willing to do so and not compromise their own competitive advantage. And then we're going to go into questions both ways as quickly as we can. My beautiful brother of 25 or so years, David Levitt, please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm David Levitt. I got a doctorate at MIT, and I was fortunate enough to be in the founding team at the MIT Media Lab when we realized that media science was something that people at MIT needed to study. And I was at VPL Research, the company that invented the modern concept of virtual reality, although obviously we owe a huge debt to another student of Professor Marvin Minsky, Ivan Sutherland, who really invented the core technology in the 60s. I'm now CEO of Pantomime Corporation, and we're inventing something perhaps at least as radical, because when we invented virtual reality in the 80s and 90s, having a computer in the room was the exception. And now, and people would write, in fact, my co-founder at Pantomime, Don Hopkins, his academic advisor, Professor Weiser at Maryland, used to say, well, this virtual reality thing is going to change very radically when we have ubiquitous computing. Because there'll be many devices in the room, and if you try and funnel everything through one, you're going to have to do something special not to ignore most of the things in the room. It won't work for augmented reality necessarily, may not work socially. And we actually have invented some things that resolve the issues that Professor Weiser raised and say, hey, what if every screen in the room is a portal into virtual reality? What if every mobile device in the room is something that lets you reach in and interact in a virtual world? And we've actually created what we call a pantomime platform that does that. And it winds up, now I'm not going to do my 5 things now. Other people will introduce themselves.
No,
right?
this is your time.
Okay. Okay. So I made a little time map, and right now we're in the era of 2015, where looking around is most of what people do in virtual reality, and having pre-recorded 360 media and having devices that are head-mounted displays that don't have things like the data glove that VPL used to use to actually reach in, it makes sense that you're going to want to mainly look around, and unless you're Pele or some great soccer master, you're not going to interact that much hitting things or affecting things. I would say that next year is really the era of reaching in, and just to give a sense of what every device living in virtual reality means.
You can show it, by the way.
I could show it. Right now, the people at the table next to me can see that there's a bunch of balls and coins balanced on my iPad, and they're being cornered out of this case. Now, one of the things that's hard in virtual reality that's really easy with an iPad is looking over someone's shoulder. And I'll show people this a little later, and I was showing some people before, but basically this is bumping into a bunch of things on a tabletop, and when I grab it, it has an estimate of where my hand is, and I can hit things with it, and it becomes a virtual Wii paddle that doesn't require any setup, and the technique that we developed that's patented that knows the exact size and shape of these devices, and in fact, when this device looks in the mirror, it sees another device with a green case on it in the mirror. It's going to be hard to see from there, but
you can show it to people
but there it is.
that are out there if they want to see it.
But
this is going beyond head-mounted displays to immersion everywhere.
So the theory is that although immersion with a head-mounted display is the exciting thing that we invented back in the 80s and 90s, what's the most shareable is the technology that leverages and recruits the devices that people already have. If you're going to have a mass consumer phenomenon for immersive reality, it's going to be around the devices that people already own. So in fact, what Pantomime does is it runs on iPads, and it runs on iPhones, and it runs on Macs and Windows, and in the long run, as the year goes by, it'll also run on game consoles, and you'll be able to pick up any mobile device and whack things with it, or it'll be an avatar, that's a tool that lets you spade things or spray things or all the things that you might want to do. And it can also be your virtual body, and we have scenes where people use them to dance around and have body language. And so all of the things that, it actually winds up solving many of the key problems with virtual reality. So 2016 is the era of reaching in. And by the way, this makes a distinction between what you might call Terminator augmented reality, where you see a layer of stuff and it's giving you information and doing vision processing, versus what you might call Roger Rabbit virtual and augmented reality, where you're reaching into a world and interacting. And we're very much more focused on the latter, and we already have things that support that kind of thing. I would say 2017 is going to be more the era of networked and social. Now, we've seen off-space VR, one of the early out-of-the-box letting you talk to each other and see each other in networked worlds. Really, almost with the exception of Pantomime and Alt-Space, everyone is making single-user experiences and trying to make those great, and that's plenty challenging enough. But there's no networks, there's no sharing in VR. And that's even worse, because you can't see the people sitting right next to you either. So the versions of augmented and virtual reality where you're seeing a big TV screen, our designs work with Apple TV, they work with your big home screen computers. Those are the ones that actually let you socialize locally, and ours are already networked. So if my Mac was sitting next to this, I would see the iPad in that scene and so on. If we go to 2018, that's maybe where you really get to the ubiquitous computing era. And where if I have a fitness band on my arm and a watch on my wrist, I I might be a cyber athlete in virtual worlds, where the fact that all of those have motion sensors, and increasingly very few mobile devices lack them, that means that I am a fully empowered, active agent inside of these virtual and augmented worlds. So that's, it may take longer than that. We're actually doing almost all of these things at Pantomime already, but we're not doing them from starting with a head-mounted display. We're starting with mobile devices and starting with personal computers. That actually gives us an opportunity to have apps that have audiences of hundreds of millions and do exciting things that don't require anyone to buy any additional hardware. And then again, in the area of ubiquitous computing, you could argue that that's where you want to be. Don't tell people what hardware to buy. Give them the software that they need to fully use the computers that everybody is already immersed in. It's really a different kind of immersive, where in our demonstrations, if you walk around a table that's got a bunch of computers facing each other, they see other consumers, they see other computers behind them. So that's a quick summary of those few years, and I'm eager to show anybody here Pantomime Playground. You can also download it yourself. And when my kids or when my nephews are playing with our latest app, they're squishing bugs on a real table, and they have an advantage if there really is a real table under them, because it gets really flat, and they're killing predatory bugs, or they're having a sports type game,
Or hugging them.
or protecting a mantis, or feeding it by getting ants to follow you, and then the mantis follows them. They're reaching into worlds, and they're not having to put on headsets, which of course their teachers would say, I'll never let my students have one. And there's this disconnect between what consumers are already eager to do and what we ambitious augmented and virtual reality people imagine what will be 5 years from now. And Pantomime's theory is that a lot of it can happen in the next year or two if we say, okay, the head-mounted display is optional, and you can reach in before you have to buy anything.
One quick question. Now, I'll ask each of you at least one question. What's the role of AI, or whatever will evolve as AI, in the future of immersive experiences, whether it's VR or AR?
Well, we have some artificial intelligence insects in some of our apps already, but they're very simple. I think my view, although I have a degree in AI, I'm also very cautious about overestimating it. And I would say the most exciting part of virtual reality and augmented reality is actually the ability to communicate with real people. And that having artificial agents prematurely won't necessarily help the experience. It's usually a fallback for systems that aren't properly networked.
I see it more as story generation for the secondary and tertiary experiences if people choose not to be drawn into a primary story that a director might be attempting to weave through an immersive environment. No one's ever given a year-by-year breakdown. I really appreciate that. Aaron, well, so David is family. We've known each other for many, many decades. Aaron is family in another way. I've known his cousin for many, many decades. We've known each other for many, many minutes now. But Aaron is an equally prestigious fellow. I had him nailed at 30, and I was wrong. He's older, but he's very young, except in his vision. He's also an MIT guy. I also went to the Media Lab, but I didn't actually go to MIT, so it doesn't count. But Aaron has a very interesting background and a perhaps even more interesting future. Why don't you introduce yourself just a little bit, and then share some of the trends you've observed.
Sure. So my name's Aaron Koblin. I have a background kind of where art and technology meet, also with data visualization. I spent the last 7 years at Google leading a team called the Data Arts team. It was the West Coast branch of the Creative Lab, if you guys know anything about that. Basically, it was an amazing job. It was a great opportunity to experiment with HTML5, JavaScript, WebGL, all those technologies, and make things like Arcade Fire music videos where you can type in the address where you grew up and it builds the whole narrative around your own history using Street View and satellite imagery. Other things like the Johnny Cash project, which is a music video where every frame is drawn by a different person and it's a constantly evolving animated data set instead of one music video. Anyway, I started doing a lot of these projects. I met a music video director down here, actually named James Frost originally. We worked on a Radiohead music video that was without video, so before Connect and all those things. We were using structured light scanners and then ultimately a Velodyne LiDAR scanner, which was what the Google self-driving car uses currently. So in that process, I met another music video director named Chris Milk, and he and I totally hit it off. We've been working together for the last 10 years, and we founded a company called Verse together. Verse is a story-driven virtual reality company. So we're creating content and distributing it through a player which exists currently on these devices through what we're calling Magic Window Mode, where you can look around and see them now. You can also drop it into a cardboard viewer if you have one, or it'll work on all the upcoming headsets. So if you have an Oculus Rift or a Crescent Bay, or sorry, a HTC Vive or a PlayStation VR, it'll be on all those. So really our focus is on narrative, story-driven content. We've released a couple pieces already. You may have heard about some of the stuff with the New York Times that we've been working on. We have a partnership with the United Nations, so we've done a series of shorts. The first one was at a Syrian refugee camp in Jordan called Clouds Over Sidra. We did a project recently called Waves of Grace, which is in Liberia, talking about the Ebola, particularly one individual who's actually survived Ebola and is now working with people in their recovery. We really think that virtual reality presents an opportunity for empathy. My co-founder did a TED Talk this year called The Empathy Machine, and it's kind of an unintended side effect, but actually a really important and valuable attribute of virtual reality. So
dig in a little granularity change. You said empathy machine?
Yeah, empathy machine.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so the context there is our brains are hardwired for faces and places, and obviously we've existed. So now what we've done is create a technology that's fundamentally hacking our senses and convincing us that we're somewhere we're not. And with that, I was surprised in my first experiences to feel particularly vulnerable. That happened to be a dinosaur that looked like it was going to chop my head off. But in actuality, that vulnerability means also a heightened connection, a sense that there's a realness to this, a virtual reality. But with that, when somebody, like for instance in our films, looks directly into your eyes, it's not a jarring thing like it is on the big screen where it breaks this suspension and is a comedic element. It actually feels like you're there and they're connecting with you, at least momentarily, in a really kind of visceral way. So with that, we've been really interested in the power of virtual reality to not only place you in a sensory way, like a roller coaster, but in a deeply impactful emotional way, being present in these other realities. And those realities can be real realities, or they can be imaginary, and they can be mixes. So I'm also interested in AR, especially as I think AR can exist in a meta sense within VR, if that makes any sense. So as I mentioned, also part of my background is in data visualization. And I think there's huge opportunity for educational material and communication materials that fuse motion graphics and AR elements in storytelling that's totally virtual. So I think that's one of the trends that I've noticed is, as every new medium matures, it starts by imitating the past medium, and we've been seeing a lot of that. There's the first forays into watching a big screen TV in virtual reality. That's interesting to a certain point, but I think it's intrinsically wrong to think about virtual reality as an evolution of any of the other mediums, television especially. I think there's a different vernacular, there's a different language, a different grammar for storytelling, and that's really what we're trying to tease out. What does it mean from a documentary perspective to be present in these spaces? From a fiction perspective, what does it mean for me to inhabit this? Am I first person? Am I a character? What do I do with the fact that I can't necessarily interact? How's it going to look when I can? What does 6 degrees of freedom mean from a storytelling perspective? Is that important? What are the trade-offs with photorealism versus interactivity? These are all the things that we're thinking about and starting to experiment with. And part of the reason that we're creating our own platform so that we can have a bit more agility in tackling our perspective on some of those answers.
So, wow. I have 2 questions for you. I'm going to ask you to do them fairly quickly because I want to give everybody the same amount of time. My first question was, when I started looking into your work, I was really blown away primarily by your art and your aesthetic. Some of the data visualization stuff you were doing before was beautiful. So where is art going, and how do we perceive it if it's increasingly machine generated? That would be my first question. Take a quick stab at it.
Sure. Well, I think I would argue that it's still not machine generated. And I kind of have a background in algorithmic and generative art. And even when it's generative and machine generated technically, it's still kind of a feedback loop and an iterative process with a human and with some kind of inspiration. So I think I look to computers still as tools, and incredibly and increasingly powerful tools. But I think when you think about art in a virtual reality kind of environment and context, it's incredibly exciting because you have this idea of scale and scope and contextualization. I keep coming back to data visualization, but just the simple scale thing. If you have a box this big and you have a small amount next to a large amount, it's nothing compared to seeing that visualized in front of you and looking, and there's a 30-story building. And that kind of visceral juxtaposition as a sensory really has a powerful impact. But I think one of the other projects I did was a visualization of air traffic over North America. So it's called flight patterns, and you just see the daily ebb and flow of people living their lives. And I think that in virtual reality is something I'm experimenting with now. How can you make the invisible visible? And that's an incredibly powerful thing, not only making it tangible to your imagination, but to your senses as an experience.
Okay, now this next question, it would have a long answer, except you've only got 1 minute.
Sure.
The opening to my graduate school thesis was, technology is neither evil nor good. It depends on how you use it. I love that you start talking about empathy, because I'm a mental health educator using these media. So my question was, where do you see technology? Do you see technology harming or enhancing humanity? Because so many people say that are out on the outside, this is awful. This is. So where do you see this possibly helping to evolve humanity when it comes to being in touch with emotions or?
Yeah. I mean, yes is the answer. It will do both of those, as most technologies do. I tend to be a techno-utopian and optimist in that I think there are huge opportunities for us to communicate with people, to relate to people, and connect with people that are totally different from us. I think there's education capitally, and then there's education lowercase, which is really about diversity of experience, richness of culture, and communication. We're also looking at the social potential in connecting people real time, but that's a tangent.
So I forgot to address David Levitt as Dr. David Levitt because he's a friend of mine. I will not forget to address Dr. Barry Sandrews. He's a new friend of mine, but I'm very happy to know him. And
it's not plural.
Pardon?
It's not plural.
Okay, sorry. Okay. No, I was saying that the two Dr. Sanders, the one that I know and don't know. I admit I still have ego. I apologize for that. And I am. It's vestigial, but it's still there. Barry, you have an amazing background, like David, in academics and even more in brain science. Introduce yourself a little bit and then talk about the amazing things you're doing right now and where you see it going.
Well, my first career was a neuroscientist at Harvard Medical School for 8 years, and studying how color and CGI can be used to enhance diagnostic imaging. Around 80, I won't talk about what year it was, but some VCs came to me and basically wanted me to invent a process for colorizing black and white movies. I had a career and I didn't want to do it, but they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So I took a leave of absence and came to Hollywood and invented a process, the first digital process for colorizing black and white movies. Did all of Ted Turner's work and worked for all of the other studios. Also did work for Spielberg. I invented an ink and paint and compositing system that did his first all-digital animated feature film, We're Back, A Dinosaur Story, which I think probably maybe probably none of you have seen. But I stopped destroying our American film heritage and went into education. And there I founded a company called Lightspan that was creating interactive edutainment for kids, basically education for whole school districts. It was very successful. No competition there.
Is the dark side of AR.
No, I think, and obviously, I think that AR has a very significant place in education. This was for K-6. Then I went back to destroying our American film heritage in 2000 when I invented a new process for colorizing, and did a lot of work for my own library and as well as for libraries for a lot of the studios. Also worked on Scorsese's The Aviator and a few other feature films, including Entourage for HBO. And 2008, actually 2007, I saw my first 3D ready television, and it blew my mind. And I said, this is going to be the future of entertainment. Well, it is in theaters anyway. And so what I did was I took all of my technology and I realized that to convert 2D film to 3D, 65% of it was my colorization process. So I invented the other 35% and started a company called Legend 3D. And over the past 6 years, we've done about 35 of the highest performing feature films that have come out of Hollywood, including The Walk, which we just finished. I hope you all get to see it in 3D, because if you don't see it in 3D, you've only seen 20% of it. Right now, I'm looking at augmented reality. I'm trying to expand the envelope of entertainment for augmented reality because I think that there's a huge future in it. I see in the not too distant future a time when a family can sit around at a coffee table or kitchen table and actually watch a performance of Katy Perry without glasses, without goggles, but actually around the table with the family, and everybody will have their own perspective of her singing. That can be done. That can be done today. So that's where I'm looking. As far as VR is concerned, huge amounts of money are going into VR right now, and it's coming from smart money. But what I've learned over the many years I've been doing startups and being an entrepreneur is that smart money is not always smart, and I think that I think there's going to be a big change probably by second quarter of next year. Right now, lots of companies, including my own company, the company I founded, Legend 3D, are making money in VR, creating content. They did The Recruit, which won an award here, as a matter of fact. What we did was we took a VR experience that was shot in 3D, but the 3D didn't work. So we took one eye of the camera and then converted it all. It came out beautiful. I think if anybody sees it, I think you'll agree. We also did a commercial for Patron tequila, and there we used a GoPro array and a drone, and we went from the fields all the way to the finished product at a fancy black tie party, and very, very effective. And it's all in stereo, so really great stereo. Of course, it doesn't have parallax, which is one of the problems with VR. I think that a lot of people who are making money right now creating content for VR are creating content really for CES. And I think that after CES, the consumer electronics industry completely screwed everything up in terms of the 3D home market, completely screwed it up. And I have no doubt they're going to screw this up too. What I think is going to happen is that with all the cardboard and everything out there, I mean, sure, it's going to be, everybody's going to have something, a device to look at, to use for VR, but I think it's going to be a transient type thing. Whereas everybody in this hotel right now, other than me, because I have a Windows phone, can see augmented reality, can experience it, and can engage in it. And so I think the future is going to be AR, and I think it's going to become ubiquitous in 3 to 5 years.
Okay, I have an interesting question to ask you. It's a little bit of a spin on a question that I asked a few minutes ago, but because of your deep background in neuroscience, et cetera, do you think my comment earlier about the brain as a metaphor for considering where immersion augmentation is actually a valid statement? And the way I look at everything is we're all just extensions. Everything we're doing, it just seems like in the end, everything is ultimately about helping human beings be able to problem solve and survive. What do you think of the notion of neurology as a looking glass into where technology can go? And again, this riffs off my comment earlier that the best interfaces are the ones you don't see.
Really? Okay. Yeah. I agree. I think that I think there is a place for it with AR. I don't necessarily think that there is with VR. There's a lot of problems with VR. I mean, Uncanny Valley is a real phenomenon. I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but you know, the thing that really turns me off are avatars when I'm in VR. And the more realistic they are, the more uncomfortable I get, and that's called the Uncanny Valley. And we are so in tune with faces and with people. We don't know each other the way dogs do. Fortunately, we know people. We know each other by our faces, and we know exactly where that's going on. It's within the brain, and the most subtle variances that don't meet our expectations destroys the whole thing. So I think that we have to be very careful with VR. And as far as I think that for autism and some of these really interesting and important maladies, I think that AR could be a very, very significant help, because it really, in fact, my daughter is neurolinguistic, and he's in San Francisco, and she uses AR to actually bring autistic kids out of their shell a bit, and it really works. You're not going to put a VR headset on them.
Okay, great, thank you. I recently was told that anybody you meet through LinkedIn, you have to be suspicious of. There is somebody on the panel I met through LinkedIn, and it has completely dispelled this whole thesis, at least in this particular case. Adam, I don't know why I did it, but I was trying to figure out who does VR and AR, and I don't remember exactly what I put into LinkedIn, but I say this young cherubic face from Perth, Australia, which happens to be the most isolated city on the planet. That's their claim to fame. I mean, my equivalent would be, I have the worst bad breath in the world. I don't know if it's the same. Nobody laughed because it's true, actually. It works when you make fun of yourself, thank you. Thursday nights. So Adam is a very bright young fellow who came from the corporate world because he had a dream. And when you figure out why you're here, what you have to do, you need to do it. And so Adam and I developed a rapport, and it's led to him flying an awfully long and far distance to tell about how he got here, how he got involved in immersion, and where he's going as well. Go ahead, Adam.
Yep, so hi everyone. David's made it quite clear that I'm the youngest and most foreign person here, which is great. So I was actually born in England, moved to Australia when we were 5. I studied engineering, and then I somehow ended up in commerce and joining Deloitte Consulting. So I did that for 3 years in Perth. I did a few global projects, got to spend some time living in Melbourne, which is cool. A lot of the work there, or just to describe Perth, the main industries are mining and oil and gas. We went through a boom in the early 2000s, and that ended around 2007, 2008, so close-ish to when you guys had the GFC. And when I joined Deloitte, it was a lot of cost reduction and supply chain and procurement strategy work. Very interesting 3 years. We worked very hard. I lost touch with my techie side, so I was a massive geek growing up, and then engineering probably would have made me even geekier, but got a lot more commercial. And then I discovered VR about halfway through last year. So there's a very successful game studio in Perth, which is quite rare because it's not a techie city, called Off Peak Games. And they came over to my house, brought over a Rift. My mum and I actually tried the roller coaster. I thought it was incredible. I didn't really want to do gaming, and I won't go into the content discussion, but my view was that it can be used heavily in industry. So I know that this is a Hollywood event, but the two areas I'm going to talk about are mental health and industry applications for VR. So when I tried it out, I was actually working with Rio Tinto, which is one of the largest mining companies in the world. They were doing a project called the Autonomous Trucks Program, which is basically trying to replace drivers on trucks on mine sites in Western Australia. And that's part of a broader program called Mind of the Future, which is trying to replace human beings, which is quite a crazy concept. Anyway, so I part-time did VR for about 10 months. That was extremely difficult. Anyone that's familiar with consulting knows it's quite a tough lifestyle by itself. So to co-found a VR company on the side was difficult. I actually resigned from that role about 4 months ago to try and do this, to see how it would go for 6 to 12 months. We've progressed quite well with Rio Tinto, so in the mining industry. Other companies in Perth, you probably aware of Chevron. Woodside is a competitor of Chevron as well. And the main spaces we've been looking at there is safety. So the stuff we're looking at for Rio Tinto is inductions. So everyone that starts there has to do a 2-day induction. On the second day, currently, they do a 2D video, which introduces you to the mine site. There's a few other things looking at architecture, education. The reason that David and I have clicked so well is because, aside from all the corporate stuff, my main passion is to do something in the mental health space. So I came up with this. I did an accelerator program a few weeks ago in Perth, months now, and as part of that, they asked me to develop a platform that involves technology and mental health, because I've been speaking about it. I came up with this thing called Project Dopamine. David really liked the deck, and the idea of it is that it combines virtual reality, something like Emotive or an EEG that can kind of track how your mood is going, and there's an element of AI to treat anxiety sufferers using mindfulness, or there are other meditation techniques we're looking at. That project is in very early R&D phase, so I can talk vaguely about it, but we haven't developed a platform or anything like that. And I believe that we'll be funded from the industry stuff, and the profits from that will drive the mental health or Project Dopamine. So,
Trends.
you want to talk about trends? Okay. So some of the interesting stuff happening in Perth, and again, I'm not going to go into the Hollywood content stuff. There's a company called Surgical Realities. Their co-founders are 3 orthopedic surgeons, and they've been looking at, their craziest project is developing a robot that performs surgery without a surgeon present. So basically, you have someone wearing a headset, and there's a lot of AI involved, and it will perform things like, I don't know any procedures, but let's say something related to a knee reconstruction. I've seen the robot. It's a long way away from being finished, but it was a very cool thing to see, and we've been working a lot with them on what can we do in the health space together. So with us looking at mental health, them looking at that kind of stuff. Their surgeons have already started using the Gear VR, and there's an experience on that called Perfect Beach, which is worth trying if you guys want to try meditation in VR. They've actually been giving it to patients before going into procedures to calm them down. A paper that I was very interested in that I read recently was about the use of VR on burns victims. So rather than drugging people up, seeing if you can kind of distract the brain with VR. So that covers some health trends. Other ones, like I mentioned, in industry, so in mining and oil and gas, they're interested in safety. I think there's room for operations, definitely more in the AR space. So when people talk about AR being worth, the number I read was 4 times as much as VR. I think you put out 10 times.
I think 100.
100, okay, could be.
That's just anecdotal, though.
Yeah, I think that's where industry is going to go with VR and AR. So some obvious things you can think about is just basic information about the site that you're on. If any of you have seen the Microsoft HoloLens video, there's a part of that where a dad is teaching his daughter how to fix some plumbing, and it produces a hologram of where she needs to place the replacement pipe. So that kind of thing obviously has some huge applications in industry. So what have I done? Health, heavy industry operations, training and inductions. I think education is another big area. We haven't touched on that so much. There's another startup in Perth called Sour City that's more in that space. I'm very good friends with the co-founder. They originally tried to reproduce university courses using VR, and they've changed they've skewed their business model quite a bit. But when I think about education using VR or AR, I think about either a history lesson. So traditionally, you read a textbook; it can be very boring. If you were able to produce an experience such as, let's say, the colonization of Australia in VR, not only do I think it would be a lot easier to remember that, but you're not going to have students falling asleep. It's going to keep people switched on. And then you can introduce a teacher into the environment and pause it and bring out dates and so on. Another side of education, because I really like chemistry and it was one of my best subjects, is things like zooming in on the atom and breaking molecular bonds and watching a nuclear explosion happen at a microscopic level. Do you want me to keep going?
No.
No, let's hold on that. Okay.
Only because I have exactly 5 minutes
Yep.
for both folks, and then I'm going to break the rules because I don't think there's anything after us, so we can get the conversation. Usually the seminars are another 15 minutes. I noticed this one was clipped. Tim. Adam, well, first of all, Adam, thank you, man. That's great, and keep going on the mental health space.
Yeah.
Do what you love, but find other things to pay for it if you have to. Tim.
Well, I have the dubious distinction, clearly.
I didn't even get to do my big hyperbolic
I'm sorry.
fellow father, cool dude.
Please do.
Non-fellow long-haired guy, because I can't grow it long anymore. But you're the only person who was on my last panel, and you were so great describing the physiology of audio in VR and AR that I really wanted you back, because this is so conceptual, but you actually are at on the boards trying to figure out how to make audio realistic. And what I've discovered recently, after going to an investment meeting where there were 5 audio AR companies pitching for money, is that audio seems to be leading the way for commercial applications. It took me by left field. So I'm not sure to what extent you can speak to that, but introduce yourself so the folks know who you are and talk about what you're learning these days.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's very helpful. Tim Gedimer, owner of Source Sound here in Los Angeles. Our primary, I was just about to say, I think I have the dubious distinction of being the only non-scientist on this board. I've been involved in doing primarily feature film and feature film type storytelling with sound my entire career. I started here in Los Angeles in about 1986, worked at the first all-digital sound facility here called EFX Systems. We did a number of films for companies like Warner Brothers, New Line Cinema, all the majors. Cut my teeth in the digital world that way. In fact, we were the first wave of people who came up through college and did not start with analog editing. We went directly into digital editing for feature film and for other interactive experiences that were burgeoning at the time. The game business was just kind of basically getting off the ground at that time, so we were also heavily involved in working with the game people to provide interactive experiences. Flash forward many, many years, years and years worth of projects, and started the company Source Sound with the primary objective to bring feature film quality and as much immersive sound to that those people who had not been serviced very well at the studios, which were the feature film marketing people. They were always swept under the rug by the feature people doing the actual work to do the film. They said, we don't have time for this. But as advertising became more and more sophisticated, it was very clear that they needed a more sophisticated solution for sound. So we started a company to address that issue and have become very successful in doing that. Along the way, we also have had a very strong presence in the game industry. We did many, many projects with Electronic Arts. My partner Charles Deenan ran worldwide audio for Electronic Arts when he left after 9 years. And so we're involved in a lot of AAA games. We're doing the Star Wars game right now, and amongst many other top game titles. So my involvement in VR has been a natural gestation of all the audio work that we've done for our entire careers. Dolby came to us and said, hey, we got this company called Jaunt that is doing this crazy stuff that needs some special sound work. Are you interested? And I took one look at the technology. I said, yeah, we better do that. Sound is so important in this environment, whether you're talking about VR or AR. The dirty little secret in a lot of the VR circles behind closed doors is that VR is really just a stopover to AR. And if the technology was there for AR to be ready for prime time, we would just be migrating directly to that. So we're very much looking forward to all the opportunities that are going to present, all the challenges also that are going to present themselves as we try to create these experiences for people that have meaning as they navigate this landscape of brand new technology. So anything that has to do with sound, whether it's capturing audio on sets or in post-production, we've been hearing a lot about different types of VR and different types of experiences. Certainly what we would do for a documentary would be completely different than what we would do for Kaiju Fury, for Jaunt, where it's really a cinematic experience, would be completely different than if we were doing an interactive game type piece for somebody like Disney or for any number of the game companies. So there's a wide range of tools that we have to navigate right now in VR. Everybody seems to want to rule the world, of course, so every job and every company that we work with, we have to learn their technology, understand it, and use it in some creative way that helps the people who are making those experiences achieve their goals in whatever space they're trying to
So Tim, question for you.
Yeah.
You're arguably a studio person because you work with the large studios, you're a pro. most technologies are created initially by entrepreneurs, many of which, despite their beautiful inventions and disruption, fall by the wayside, and typically, after a conference or two, these new fields are absorbed into the Borg. This is a very technical field. Do you see the studios? Because I know all the studios each have their own VR people now,
Sure.
looking for things. Do you see the VR or AR ultimately being absorbed into the studio network, label, infrastructure? Or do you see it being something that could also incline towards the consumer-generated content as well, given the great expertise required to do, for example, what you do?
I think, from what I see, the studios are typically not technology people. They will co-opt technology that's available. They will allocate funds to purchase that technology. But I'm not seeing a lot of movement in that arena. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a studio or two.
Sitting in the audience.
What's that?
Sitting in the audience. Any
yeah,
studio
right.
people here right now? Just one?
Who may be interested in
Thesis disputed.
Purchasing companies that have been in R&D for 3 or 4 years to jump in. Sure, I think there's a consolidation of things that's going to happen along the way.
Maybe even more ominous. I mean, the studios were slow, but Facebook and Google weren't. $500 million to Magic Leap and $2 billion to Facebook. That maybe they're part of the studio infrastructure for the future.
Well, I would argue that the studio culture is typically what I see is too slow for this.
Okay. Minus the guy in the audience. Adam, of course. Adam, quick question for you because I skipped over. L.A., San Francisco, New York, Berlin, even Hamburg, London, Stockholm, Beijing, Shanghai, all these major cities have VR happening in big ways. Perth, what's it like trying to sell mining companies about VR? Do they even know what it is? Did they ever see the Lawnmower Man? I mean, do people look at you and twist their head like a confused dog?
Okay, so one thing about Perth is it is quite innovative in the areas of robotics, looking at things like AI, that kind of stuff. Because there was an issue, because of the end of the mining boom in the late 2000s, a lot of R&D teams got thrown out the door. So they had a few years where they weren't looking at the latest technology. And I guess we were a bit lucky to get in front of Rio Tinto. I'm friends with an ex-DA partner from Perth, and he was invited to go into Rio and do he's doing a workshop for a day on the latest technology to be applied in the safety sector. And he invited us to do an hour-and-a-half demo. We actually had Susie Redlack, who's on the exec. She represents the safety side of the business, and a bunch of general managers there. And I guess, to answer your question, they got so excited after playing with the technology that the rest was kind of easy. So,
that's great.
Yeah, and it was similar. There's another organization called Landgate. I won't go into it.
Oh, that's good. Speaking of mental health issues, I have OCD. Yeah. I wanted to finish everybody and then come to Sivan.
Okay.
So we've had some great discussions as well. You're riding the wave, in fact, of the company that I was referring to, if I'm not mistaken, that's really probably gone deeper into investing into VR than anybody, and not just investing, but actually going hands-on. If I'm not mistaken, I think you're running the production studio now. They're building a whole ecology, which I'm very impressed with. Why don't you introduce yourself? You have a very interesting sort of non-VR background, and now you're running fast, and you have some great resources and some great companies.
Yeah, sure. So, everybody, my name is Sivan Ram. I'm the general manager at River Studios. As David, as you said, we're a production studio, creative studio for premium VR experiences. We're based in San Francisco, and we are a part of the Rothenberg Ventures ecosystem. It's a very interesting story, and we're very well positioned. There's 3 key business units at Rothenberg. It started from a VC, a venture capital firm, seed stage, that decided to double down on VR in about 2014. They decided to not only invest, so they were looking for the best acceleration program, basically to invest in their best graduates, and when they found that there isn't one, in a very Rothenberg Ventures way, decided to start an acceleration program. They called it River, because Rothenberg Ventures initials is RV, and River is VR, virtual reality is VR, so RVVR became River. First class was launched in December 2014. 15 companies were filtered from over 500, focused mainly on VR. And the applications there were very different, hardware, software, content, and from very different use cases, health, anxiety relief, and real estate. Matterport is one of the companies, and really a very, very large breadth.
Can you, because you're in the midst of talking the filtering process, were you involved in that process?
No, I joined when we decided to spin off.
Because I almost can imagine the old Rolling Stone ads where the music exec is on the 75th floor and outside of the window there's a guy on a piano with no clothes on trying to audition. I can imagine the kinds of pitches they were getting, but I'd be curious as to what the criterion and the filters were for how they went from 500 to 15.
Yeah, first and foremost, Rothenberg Ventures positioned themselves as the millennial VC firm. They bet on millennial founders, and the use case there, or the hypothesis there, is that right now when you look at the landscape of the unicorns and the biggest companies emerging, you see millennial founders, and Instagram and Facebook and others.
Sivan meet Adam, Adam meet Sivan.
I can't speak necessarily to the filters they applied, but I could say that we saw the first class accelerating, and we saw so many synergies creating between the different companies, and essentially what the acceleration program gave to the founders coming in, they gave them creative space not only to work at, but also to engage with other companies from other disciplines and other use cases. And it was, if you read Creativity Inc. About the inception of Pixar, you know how important it is to be in the same space with people from different disciplines, and just making cool, I won't use profanity, but cool stuff.
So it's an ecology.
It is. It's an ecosystem.
You're about to say cool shoot, right?
Cool shoot. And then they brought in a small team of production people to support the portfolio companies or their acceleration companies. And companies started coming in from outside and asking, do you also do content? Do you do client work? And they saw the opportunity around May of 2015 to spin off this team into a new venture, a new entity called River Studios, and I was brought in to lead that. And it's been a hell of a ride. We started 6 people, and nowadays we're more than 30 people, growing very rapidly, working with brands and artists to create content and virtual experiences in the world. We're trying to get to market, to grow the market as soon as possible. If you guys want to hear a little bit about the philosophy behind this ecosystem, I suggest you look up Mike Rothenberg. He's the founder, CEO. You look up his talk at Stanford, and where he talks about the blue ocean strategy, where basically nothing starts like blue oceans. It starts like a blue pond, it grows into a blue lake, and then it grows into a blue ocean. And we're at the blue pond stage, blue lake, and we're as fish in the pond. We're all working together to make it bigger. So we partner with other studios, with brand themselves, to create experiences that really bring VR to consumer market. We do that through developing from the bottom of the market. Now, we are platform agnostic, and we develop for the Vive and for the Morpheus and for every platform exists. But if you ask me how, and this is a part of my kind of 3-4 trends that I see, we see consumption for VR getting from the bottom of the market using the mass adoption that smartphones have. And that's why we're optimizing. We're not settling for quality. We are optimizing for distribution, if that makes sense. And we're trying to operate in a space where there's a pull dynamic. And to make a distinction, right now we see a lot of content being made in a push dynamic where people create content, short stories, whatever it is, and they say, here world, please consume my content, please watch this movie. We've seen that with Kaleidoscope VR, a very cool film festival, and beautiful pieces of work, but it's very hard to get the word out there. Now, our studio wants to be in a pull dynamic where customers really want to be engaged and pull the content and consume it and look for it actively. And we identified 2 key spaces. One is music and the second is sports. So if I create a content around the team that you love, you would actively want to go out and find it. Same goes for your favorite artist. If you look at, and I was speaking at a conference, Inside 3D Printing conference up in the Valley yesterday, and sorry, train of thought was broken. Anyway, we're trying to build a lot of experience in those spaces. Oh yeah, so basically if you look for the most viewed content on
YouTube.
YouTube 360, you'd find, I think, a Subaru with 1.4 million views, and that's a pretty bad cat video on YouTube today. If you look for any of the big artists, you'll find 500 million views. Rihanna Stay, that was the example I used. Her single Stay has more than 450 million views. So I feel if we generate the right content in the right kind of verticals, we will go to market much quicker, much sooner than people anticipate. And we are working today with some of the biggest artists in the world, global, international artists, to create VR. And I feel like in 2016, the big way into mass consumption would be in areas where people are not necessarily looking for it, but just it comes to their mind through hearsay or through marketing, and it's so compelling for them to consume that they'll be asking for it.
So this is my question for you. You have a fine education, you have an MBA from a great school, and this has been a very fun gig for you because you're getting to practice all the things that you've learned in B school. What advice would you give those in the audience right now that are trying to figure out where to spend the money that they've been given, or how to position a pitch so they might get some money? You know, what is your observation of where things are today in terms of pitching? There's been such a volume of pitches. It's got to be changing right about now as we approach Christmas.
Yeah. Well, I would say, first of all, if you're building a business model, if you're building a new company, I would say think about where money is coming from and where is it going within your plans. Are you going for a niche to be specialized, or are you trying to hit consumer? And that's obviously much harder. Talking about VR, very different applications. I think if you are looking to start creating content, then getting the right team, the right storytelling, expertise, knowing the tools, that's a key factor.
Pixar was made on the back of their key storyteller. I mean, he's basically what made it work. In the end, all the technology aside, all that matters is story, emotion, and character, right? If you're in the domain of story.
And I do want to say that I agree about the attractiveness of AR as an industry. Recently spoke to a friend at Facebook. He gave me his own personal opinion. He's pretty high up, and he said he believes it's going to be VR, AR, VR. And I think that's an interesting take, because I don't think it's a way in strictly for AR. I do think there are things about VR that are unique, and they cannot be replicated. The sensation to be transported to a different place, a different time, is something you cannot replicate within AR. And I think that's the biggest value proposition of VR nowadays. I strongly urge people not to look at VR where it is today, and try to have the foresight in seeing where this can go. Back in '95, the internet, if you would ask people, what do you think the internet will bring? And they would say, great email. And it has
Mine
been
still
great.
isn't so great, depending on who it comes from.
But it's we're pretty bad with knowing the future, and we could never have imagined to do everything on the internet. You know, get our food and our taxis and do our taxes, and interact with people and share memories and you know, it's overwhelming what platforms bring and the creativity that it's bringing out of people. And I think this is, to me, the first time I saw VR, I said this is, you know, the new wave of innovation. Every 6 to 8 years, a new wave comes in. This is the big thing, and I'm always trying to be focused on where this is going and giving the entire the big immersiveness and the experience that it can bring. And I think that's really differentiated.
Now, I'm famous for doing something that other speakers don't typically do. I ask people their question. I know that there's about 7 to 10 questions at least, just on the left side, but your hand is raised, gal in the blue. Can you ask us a question that you care about? You'll learn from doing this, by the way.
I don't really have
What? You must be a Buddhist. That was pretty good, actually. You're next, but go ahead.
I was really happy to hear you say a minute ago that it all comes back to story. I'm a writer, and I'm sometimes astounded. I think we all have gone to a movie where it was clear that they spent $100 million on special effects, but the story didn't work. Writers don't cost that much money, and it makes you wonder, why didn't they get a good writer? Because when you marry those two things, it's astonishing. And
But, yeah.
I guess my question would be sort of hypothetical. If you could go back and make a movie from the past using what we know now today, is there one you would pick that you think would be a great candidate for that?
Hold on one second. I just want to, because that's a big question for everybody. We've only got a few minutes. In fact, we're already over. But I want to say that the interesting thing for you as a writer is that all that's left in this town is more or less tentpole films. And I know that the worst nightmare that a writer could ever have is emerged, which is now you have to do spec film again, spec scripts, when in the old days you could get $500,000 for doing almost anything. But this represents an opportunity if you're willing to take risks. Having said that, The Wizard of Oz would be pretty cool. But I'd like to ask more questions if you want. You had your hand up there, sir, with all the hair?
Right. Hi, Omar has one.
I'm envious. He's a friend, so I can do that.
In fact, David, yes, I have a question. This is an amazing panel. I did not expect to be here today. I'm not a scientist, I'm a poet sometimes. And David invited me. But I have been in the motion picture industry.
Omar distributed Superman.
Real quick question.
I wasn't cutting you off.
What I hear on the panel is AR and VR. What came to mind was a hydrogen molecule going like that through the universe, suddenly embracing oxygen. Right? That's what I'm hearing here. Is that this all comes together? And so my question is, if we actually get a holodeck out of what you're talking about, and I think that's what we say, we're going to have a kind of holodeck. Somebody you can say we can carry it around with us. What would be a great use for it? In terms, I heard that we want to have a reason for having this working in a certain way. And what came to my mind is, because this is a rhetorical question, was perhaps it would work for people to help conquer their fears, like they did on Star Trek. You got into the holodeck, you worked your way through it, and then you came out and you did whatever you did, and you went back and you had a problem. I think would be an amazing kind of vision.
Mental
Actually, there's
health.
already a company that has VR experiences designed specifically for phobias,
Right.
and it's fantastic.
It's called Google.
4 or 5 years.
Yeah, good stuff.
Go
That's
ahead.
just one small use, but phobias, yeah, that's obvious.
I'd answer both of these two recent questions. Yeah, you want to tell great stories, and I think there's really great opportunities for both comedy and suspense in the physically realistic world, which are, in a way, what appeals about Angry Birds and these other things to kids is the physical realism of the slingshot and whatnot. I picture the virtual reality or augmented reality system in which you're Wile E. Coyote, and there's this dangerous contraption that you're right in the middle of, and if you pluck the wrong spring, you're going on a wild ride, or your classic mechanical death machine or what have you that you're trying to escape. Those are the things that can involve you emotionally. They go back to the earliest cinema, Buster Keaton. I think there's a young Zemeckis that's going to take this and put it exactly where it wants to be in terms of we have a bowling lane in our current world where you can get right into the pin setter, and it's just. There's a terrifying moment when you realize something might grab you and take you into some unknown place. I think that's the way writers should be treating this and the way storytellers could use it.
And that's the exciting thing about this industry, is that nobody's really done it yet, especially in AR. VR has been, it's pretty obvious that gaming is going to be a monster experience, but AR, it hasn't happened yet. But I think you're probably right. To some extent, it's going to be the storytellers that in the end know how to engage people and do that. Go ahead. Go ahead, Barry.
Yeah, let me just go back to 3D for a second. 3D was around before December 2009, but it took an Avatar moment for 3D to really take off. That's what really started the industry, and that's what built my company and everything else. I think it's going to take an avatar moment for VR as well.
Anybody else want to say anything about story?
I'll go. I think it's somewhat related to the holodeck thing. So if you guys haven't seen this, you should search on YouTube for Samsung, I guess Samsung Birth, which is going to sound a bit strange. But there is a advert that went across Australia about a fly-in, fly-out worker whose wife gave birth to her third child in Perth while he was on a mine site in Queensland, and he actually experienced it through virtual reality. So on the site they set up a room with pictures of like his other kids. He wore a headset, he could communicate with his wife, he was there for the whole experience. It kind of sucks like that he couldn't actually be there, but I think the social element of all of this stuff is probably going to be the most powerful. So videos like that, it's hard not to almost cry, even as a guy, at the end, because it's so powerful. Like, in that a technology that, I mean, if you look at people on a plane or wearing VR goggles, everyone looks separated, but something like this is bringing people closer together in ways that couldn't happen before. So,
Two final questions, you and you, please.
I'm not sure what my full question is, but
Okay,
I feel like
next.
there's a lot-
I'm looking
there's
up.
a lot of the technology is the technology, and it's a great tool for storytelling. But it seems like there's a gap between where the technology is right now and the ability of the storytellers who already exist, maybe in this room, and others are in LA, but the way that they're being trained to visually not only convey their story, but also convey their story in a way that's digestible by people who are trained to take in information in a different way than the traditional 3-act narrative on the screen. So how do you guys see that gap closing, or do you see that gap closing?
So how do you reconcile a neurology used to 3-act play with an immersive story environment of some sort?
Well, we're all trained to watch things a certain way. We can all sit in front of a TV
Right.
and watch the 3 acts happen, or a movie or whatever. But in terms of the lead time for a creator to be able to imagine and visualize and have a hold of the technology, and then actually use it in a way that tells a story or something that somebody even wants to watch outside of the educational purpose.
So grammars, authoring tools, is that where we're going here?
I'm just curious, like, is anybody?
You want to address that, Aaron?
No, I mean, what you're really talking about is having a sophisticated VR viewer base,
Yeah.
which does not exist. Yeah, I mean, even the people that I know, I've explained everything to them, still won't look over here, right? When they're being prompted even by a very strong audio cue or a visual cue that's taking them in that position. So we do have a retraining, a mass retraining that needs to happen, and the only way that can happen is by sophisticated systems getting out there and for lots and lots of people to see them. And I got to put in the youth, right? The youth is going to pick this up, and they're going to get it right away.
Aaron.
And they do.
I feel like all that's going to come through a process and learning. We have the same experience when we put people in the VR headset. First thing we show is a project called Evolution of Verse. We start off on a lake, completely empty all around, and we say, turn around and keep your eye out for the train. And we sometimes physically have to turn the person in order to get them to look around. But once they identify the train, and then it hits them and explodes with birds all around them, from that point on, showing them other demos, they're looking around actively. And there's this whole process of education that has to happen from the adoption and technology side through all the language of storytelling that we're still figuring out. But I mean, if you showed a caveman a modern day action film, I'm not sure it would make sense. We know, like, cut, zoom, that there's a montage, it means this, and it's a whole training process that we have 100 years of cinema, we have to now do that.
One of the beautiful things about VR is that it allows everyone to be one. Still, I'm going to filter this one by religion. Go ahead, Christian. That's his first name, by the way. Go on.
Sorry for skipping. This is a question that has not been asked at the entire conference. What's the best acting you've seen in VR?
That's a great question. Has
That's
anybody seen any
Not
acting?
a lot of it.
That's like a really important and overlooked question right now. Yeah, one thing that we've been noticing is it's not, theater acting is actually a bit better, but it's also not theater acting. Like and I think there's actually going to evolve to be different verticals within virtual reality entertainment where you establish the expected sense of communication and presence. It comes back to what I was talking about before about what's your role as a viewer within it. Because if you're in an intimate scene and there's a couple in bed, you're like, what am I doing here? I shouldn't. You automatically feel like, I shouldn't be here. But I think part of that has to do with the training in the vernacular, and part of that has to do with the acting methodology itself. Like, if you're on set and you see people, acting for camera, it's about those cuts and those subtle movements, as opposed to theater actors who are used to occupying the space. And part of that, as a director, you have to decide how close is this camera going to be to the actor? Are we going to pick up on that subtlety? And how much is that kind of awkward overacting going to play into it? Am I going for hyper real? Is this a documentary? Or what is this thing? So all that's going to evolve. I think our approach has been really try to establish and be consistent throughout each production, and try to train the viewer as to what's expected. And then if you throw a curveball in that, that's an interesting technique to play with.
I think that I had said the last question was over here. Somebody had their hand up. Was it you? Go ahead.
So I was curious if anyone's actually integrated IoT into an AR experience. And
AR is IoT if it has a URL.
Yeah. Well, specifically, like if you actually had an object here, or a T-shirt, whatever it is, some actually real world object.
Oh, so objects in space. That's cool.
Into your app or into your experience, like what techniques you use, or what did you experiment with?
In other words, living objects with their own powers in a story space. Anybody has played with that?
I have a friend who's playing around in that space, but I'm not supposed to talk about it.
The answer is it's coming soon.
Maybe just generic then, like you said, you do like AR data visualization. Like what techniques have you used? What would you recommend?
I mean, right now we're looking at a lot of the input devices and figuring out. I mean, I think that's inevitably coming, and we're even talking about, are there modifications to the input devices to add heightened realism? Things like making them into objects that exist.
Make it really quick, because I have one last question, and then we're done.
You mentioned in your introduction the idea of using VR to affect attitude change.
Yeah.
It seems to me, without getting too clockwork orange about this, that the ability to have a user in this VR cocoon offers the possibility of creating cognitive dissonance, so that they have to resolve a difference between what you're making them feel and experience with previously held attitudes. Is there any literature in this now? Is somebody researching it?
Yeah, there's actually, the literature related to this goes back to the birth of cinema. It was the Soviets who invented a new kind of cinema that would actually get the brain to respond to the data as if it were real. It was called montage. Prior to single camera long shot, people knew they were watching a movie, so they didn't have a relationship with the data, suspension of disbelief. But the more that VR, and by the way, that they brought the Soviet Union together out of 17 countries and 150 tribes by using the power to create a believable expression of culture using this new kind of cinema. The more that VR gets photorealistic, the more that experiences become replicative of life itself, the more that we can communicate good or bad behavior change. And really will come down to our values as to where it goes. I don't know if that was helpful, but Sergei Eisenstein's a good place to start.
Yes, it is.
My pleasure. I have one last question, David. 1992, 93, this new thing called VR. How does it feel to be sitting here 13 years later, 12 years later, 22 years later? I mean, what do you want to share of your own experience of sitting here on this panel? Of course, you look exactly the same. But what would you be your closing thoughts as to where we are now as the stage 2 really beckons?
This is the most ambitious group in the world. We're focused on empathy and sharing and social things in a medium where you can't often make eye contact or look over anyone's shoulder. It's a huge challenge, and we realized back then that we didn't realize that there would be not just glass, but glass holes. And people who, that there would be, the social problems are even bigger than we anticipated back then when we were the only people who had it. Now we have to, and one of the reasons I'm doing things the way I'm doing is we have to climb up this path where mobile, fortunately, is the ladder that's taking us from where we are now to these worlds where people who just have a phone and people who have a whole headset might be able to play together in a new kind of democracy. So it's very exciting.
It's social, and therein is the hope for all of us and our future, and mostly our kids and grandkids, et cetera. Thank you very much.